Well, Shabbat Shalom and welcome. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein. This is Valley Beth Shalom Torah study for a Shabbos morning, and I am joined joyfully this morning by my two teachers and friends, Rabbi Sherre Hirsch of the American Jewish University and Rabbi Marc Gellman of South Florida and the Aspen Jewish Congregation. Good morning, friends. It's wonderful to be together. I apologize for the glitches we had last week, and I'm so glad we can share Torah this morning. Now, this morning we're in Parshat Chayei Sara, which is a transitional parsha. It is the transition from the Abraham narratives into the rest of the patriarchal history. And it involves two very simple and common life transactions. The Torah portion begins with the death of Mother Sara, who's 127 years old, Kanai Nahara, as we say. And Abraham needs to secure for her a burial place. And he goes and purchases a cave, the cave of Machpelah, which of course today is in the middle of the city of Hebron. And the whole transaction is carried out. And this theme of transactions is one of the leitmotifs of this Torah portion. The other leitmotif of the Torah portion are the two very powerful motives in common human experience, love and death. We begin with the death of the mother Sara, and then Abraham realizes he must arrange for a marriage for his son Isaac, and so he sends a servant, and the servant is unnamed in the Torah, but he's commonly recognized as Eliezer, who is Abraham's sort of chief of staff, sends him back to the old country to find Isaac a wife. And it's a classic and beautiful story. The servant is going with all of the wealth and all of the finery that he brings as a gift for this new wife. And he stops just before he enters the city, and he says a prayer because he is so taken with the enormity of this task to find the right woman for the master's son, that his life depends upon it. And he says a prayer to God, bring her to me and show her to me. When we were in rabbinical school, we had a teacher who assigned the book Shogun to us because he said, you will not understand Eliezer's nervousness except if you understand the relationship between the samurai and the warlord. The shogun is the only sort of analogy that he could find, and it was a beautiful analogy because he really owes his life to his master, and to be charged with the responsibility of finding the wife for the master's son, the next generation, the woman who will be the mother of the next generation of the covenantal community, is enormous. So he comes to the town square and he sits himself down by the well. It's always a good place to meet girls. And there comes a woman and she asks him if she can help, and she waters his camels. And there's a whole lot of camels, and that's a whole lot of water. And he realizes this is a woman who understands the deep ethic of hospitality, which is an ethic of the desert, which is exactly the ethic that Abraham holds to and the ethic that the servant is looking for. And he realizes this is the woman. It turns out she's a cousin. She's actually a first cousin. And he goes back and has the transaction. She agrees to come with him. And the first documented case of a girl falling in love, because she sees Isaac in the distance and literally falls off the camel. She falls off in love. So that's how you find out if someone loves you, if they fall off their camel. And Isaac takes Rebecca as his wife, goes into the tent of his mother, thank you, Sigmund Freud, to be comforted from the death of his mother in the arms of his new wife, and the next generation begins. Now, one of the beautiful tasks, and in some ways really very, very interesting windows on human experiences that we rabbis get to enjoy, is meeting couples who are getting married. Couples come to us all the time getting married. And the vast variety of different kinds of couples, of the way they find each other, the way that love works in this culture, and the transition from love to marriage to matrimony to building a home and a family is something that we rabbis get to witness. So Rabbi Hirsch, couples call you up and say, we got your name from a friend who you did their wedding, or our wedding coordinator suggested you, or we saw you on TV and we've read your books and you're the person we want to marry. What's like the first question you ask that couple?
God, we were right there, and I wanted to stay in the Parsha for one more minute. Can we go
Okay.
back to the Parsha for 1 second?
So Rebecca and Isaac come to you. What's the first question you ask for Rebecca and Isaac? Please go back to the Parsha.
Well, I just want to go back there for 1 second because I read a whole set of commentaries each week, and there's one in particular that I love. It's Parsha at ots.org, which is Rabbi Riskin, who, if you haven't subscribed, you should. And he wrote a beautiful thing this week on Eliezer, this messenger that's sent by Abraham to find his son a wife. And what he says is so beautiful is that Eliezer not only has to find someone who will, love him and be good to him and have a great sense of hospitality, but someone that will align with Abraham's values of monotheism and will go and pursue this life along with Isaac and his family. So he's really finding someone, not just someone who's a good person, not someone who's just friendly and welcoming. He's looking for a diamond in the rough of a person that can actually share a life together, which goes to your question, Eddie, which is when couples come to me, they're always madly in love, right? Because madly in love is sort of what you do when you first meet someone. But loving someone is very different than being married to them. Being married to them is to build a life with them, which is about much more than feeling romantic towards them. And the first thing that I ask them is, well, there's many questions I ask them before this question, but the question that gets to the heart of it is, where do you feel that your values align and misalign? And they're always thrown by that because they want me to say, like, why do you love the other person? What makes the other person so special? What makes you, what frustrates you and what do you fight about? But I ask them, where do you think your values align and misalign? And then I give them 5 suggestions: family, politics, religion, intimacy, and money as a starting point. And I make them rate them from 1 to 5. 5 being where they're not aligned and 1 being where they're absolutely aligned. It is fascinating what comes out. And that's how I begin.
Well, let me
And
probe
what have
this.
you learned? What have you learned from that?
Go ahead.
I have learned that what people fight about is consistently the same issues because their core story is not in alignment, right? It's, I see this one way because this is how I was raised. I was raised that we're always frugal. I was raised that we're never frugal, right? And so it's not ever the issue. It's that the core values are not in alignment, and they're usually in 1 or 2 areas that are very pronounced.
Well, there's an American romantic myth that love conquers all, that no matter how far apart we might be, because we have this passionate emotional love bond, we can get past these misalignment of values. And the question is that true? I would give you a funny example of this, right? When my kid was young, I took him to go see The Little Mermaid. Remember the Disney movie, The Little Mermaid?
Okay, we can't forget that movie.
Right. Well, it's, under the sea, right? So the idea is that this mermaid who lives under the sea falls in love with the prince who's above the sea. And really, in an interesting move, she trades away her voice in order to gain the feet that she needs to marry him. Of course, in the Hans Christian Andersen telling of the story, it's a tragic ending. She doesn't end up with him. But in the Disney world, of course, it has to end up with rainbows and romance. And in the Disney world, all works out in the end, and they're married and they live happily ever after. And even though her whole world has told her under the sea is where you belong and not up there, she ends up married to him. And Papa comes at the very, very end, the last scene of the movie, and blesses their union. So the American romantic myth is no matter how different you are, or as you said, misaligned is a beautiful word, how different you are, if you love each other, you'll get through this. And I remember I took my kid to see this. He was 8 years old, and we're walking out at a movie. And he says to me, Abba, can I ask you a question? I said, yeah. He said, what happened next? I said, what do you mean, what happened next? He said, what happened if a week later the prince wants fish and chips for supper and she sees her uncle on the plate You suppose she's going to enjoy being married
He
to
did
him?
not say that.
And I did. He did. And I said, you are a wicked child. I have to tell you. I mean, what happens to Cinderella and the prince when he tells her to clean the house,
Right. What happens after happily ever after?
What happens after happily ever when Cinderella realizes she has to clean the house? Is she going to enjoy? I mean, is it? So the real question, Sherre, is a very serious question. Does love
Absolutely.
conquer all? Or is love dependent upon a certain alignment of values and attitudes? What's been your experience?
Marc?
Oh, well, a couple of things. Tommy and I interviewed a guy who had written a book about marriage, and he was some sort of expert about it. And he was very clear after interviewing thousands of people. He said, basically, you should marry someone as close to being exactly like you as is possible. This notion from the Tom Cruise movie, you complete me. In other words, you're everything I'm not, and together no, that's not true. The way it works is you need someone who believes what you believe, which is what Sherre is sort of saying with Riskin's interpretation, which is, look, you can't marry someone who doesn't believe what you believe, because then you're constantly fighting about what you believe. So that's the first thing. The second is you should marry someone, that's what this guy said, who comes from an intact, loving family. That's a huge correlative factor in whether you can be successfully married, because you see in your own example of your parents how husbands and wives work stuff out. Now, it didn't
Marc,
work
not to
in our
push back on
family.
you, but like, there's not 50% of families are not
I was
in
about
that
to say,
traditional
yeah.
mode. Like, I would have
So that's
never
what
married
this
my
guy
husband
said.
if he was only looking for an intact family model that I came from, because it was far from it.
Yeah, it's understandable. And the point he was making, at least the point I derived from what he said, is, look, you can't always have everything. But basically, if you marry someone who comes from a screwed up family, the chance that they have internalized the proper moral values of marriage is near zero. It doesn't mean they haven't, it doesn't mean they can't, and it doesn't mean there aren't examples of people who have come from fractured families and have created loving families on their own. But those are the two factors. And all the people I've married, I've learned a couple of big things. One, I always watch, I don't listen too much about what they say, but I watch for two things. Do they touch each other when they're sitting across from me for no reason? Do they find some reason to touch each other? And do they laugh? And those are two huge correlations that I've seen. I want them to love, I want them to want physically to be intimate. I want them to be comfortable touching each other. And I watch for that. And I want them to have humor. I want them to have a sense of joy about what this is. And I remember the best, and then I'll ask them, when did you know that this was the person you were going to marry? I asked them, was there an incident? Was there a moment when you knew this was the person? And the best answer I ever got was from one of my congregants. The woman who he was marrying said, yeah, I knew I was going to marry David when we were driving in New York. And we were going across the Triborough Bridge. This was before the electronic things, and you had to throw money into the thing. And it was a very hot day. And what was true in those days is there was always a line. And so guys would stand there with papers, newspapers, and they'd sell them at the bridge.
Yeah.
And it was a very hot day. And she said, we were driving out to Long Island, and this guy came up to us at the bridge selling papers. And David said, listen, it's too hot for you to be out today. Give me all your papers. Here's $100. Go home. And she said, at that moment, I knew I would marry him. And I asked, Dave, when did you know that you were going to marry her? And then he told me this rather risque story, which I cleaned up a little bit. And then they're sitting on the bed, and and she was a teacher, a kindergarten kid. And she's sitting in the bed and she's doing her books with the gold stars and things. And she's not wearing anything. And then she had to go up and go to the bathroom. And as she got up, David said, I saw her and there was a little gold star on her tush. And I said, at that moment, I knew I was going to marry her. So the thing is, even then, she was thinking about her kids and about her teaching and about the preparing her lessons. And the thing is, they admired each other. And the other thing I've learned about counseling people before marriage is, you know, some people have perfect pitch. They can be lousy people, but they just never sing off key because they have this gift. They sing with perfect pitch. And I've come to the conclusion that some people have that with picking spouses. They're just perfect. They have perfect pitch with spouses. I call them good pickers. They're just good pickers. And I don't think it's because they're good people. Some of the good pickers aren't necessarily saints, but they have this understanding of who they need to marry, who is good for them, who will help them flourish. And other people don't have a clue. They just don't have a clue. Because as Sherre said, you know, when you're first in love, you're just crazy. You're crazed and you don't always have your faculties about you. And so I always look to see who are good pickers. And the other thing, the final thing I'd say about the Parsha is, and all this is, let's remember, Eliezer is part of a world where marriages are arranged. The idea of romantic love, that you marry someone you love rather than someone who was fixed up for you by your family, that's from the Renaissance. That's from the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. It didn't happen before then. And it still doesn't happen in certain cultures like the Hindu culture and others. And in certain parts of the Jewish world, the same thing too. So what you have here is people who, like Eliezer, who actually know better than you know what they need. And so there's a great argument to be made that the products of arranged marriages, which most of us in the world of romantic love find to be extremely offensive and, in fact, unfair and unjust. Here, in the most important decision of your life, you don't get to make the decision. So the fact of the matter is that there is a logic to arranged marriages, and we don't give that enough credit. So those are some of the things that I've learned from watching and listening to people who get married.
So the interesting question, I mean, the Fiddler on the Roof is about this, right? Fiddler on the Roof is a pre-modern society where all your decisions are made for a woman. And that's why it begins with matchmaker, matchmaker, make me a match. You have to wait for the matchmaker to come. Yeah. And Seitel rebels against this and marries the man she loves, the tailor Muttel Kemsoil. And I think the most touching part of Fiddler on the Roof and the most revealing, one of the most revealing texts on this very topic is, you know, in the third act, as the village is about to be disbanded and everyone's leaving, he turns to her and says, Goldie, do you love me? And she says, do I what? And he says, do you love me? Do I love you? And she says, look, I don't understand the question, because in that culture, Marc is right. You married out of a sense of obligation and responsibility. You married because tradition demanded it. You married because you had something to do in the world. And then she said, but my father and my mother said we'd learn to love each other. And so I'm asking Goldie, do you love me? And she says at the end, you know, she said, you know, fool. He says, I know, but do you love me? And she says, you know, for 25 years, I've given you my life. Of course I love you. And then at the end, the last two lines of the song are very beautiful. You know, it doesn't change a thing, but even so, after 25 years, it's nice to know. It changes everything, actually. So part of it, and even apart from the question of the arranged marriage, I mean, one of the ironies, or rather one of the mysteries of marriage is, you know, Of course you love each other now. You're both cute. You're both young and adorable and frisky and fun. You have your lives ahead of you, and you don't, and the question is, as the great Rabbi Paul McCartney once asked us, will you still need me? Will you still feed me when I'm 64? And the way in which a couple who gets married then remarries themselves many times. We remake our marriages over the course of our lives. We rediscover parts of ourselves and parts of our partners and fall in love all over again. Please.
There's a line, I forget who said it. I want to say Ayn Rand, but I don't think that's right. But it's like, all of us will have 3 marriages, sometimes to the same person. And I think it's so true. But I was going to say that your cultural reference was Fiddler on the Roof, but there's so many cultural modern references in television today, like Love at First Sight. And all these dating shows are really about handing over your picker to a casting person, to someone else. And so that you can sort of remove yourself from the biases, whether it's seeing the person or this or that, so that you can have a new experience and be open to something that maybe you haven't thought about. And that's sort of the modern Fiddler on the Roof, right? Not as beautiful, not as reality television, but for those who watch Love at First Sight, which is becoming this huge, cultural phenomena that people don't see each other. They let the casting people put 26 people in a room, and then they see if they fall in love. And it turns out that they are picked for them. So it's interesting.
Well, but part of it is because, and you know this well here in Los Angeles, what I hear from my young friends is that once you leave college and enter the world as a young professional, it's really hard to meet people.
Yeah.
I mean, in the traditional world, your aunts and uncles and cousins would invite you to Shabbos dinner and invite, potential spouses to sit across the Shabbos table from you, right? But in a world of diffuse families and diffuse relationships, and you're living in a metropolitan area, it's very hard to meet people. And then on top of that, of course, the rules for encountering another human being, the rules of sexual politics, are very, very difficult. What we expect of each other, how the transaction goes down. So internet dating has sort of come in. I have a lot of people I've married who met on JDate and even Tinder and these other kinds of Match.com, because that's become the new Yenta, the new matchmaker, a way to meet people and a way to launch relationships. Remember when my daughter was dating and she would go and she said, Abba, I've had more Starbucks than anybody in the world. I mean, just because the first date is a coffee date at Starbucks, you have to have enormously powerful kidneys in order to find a mate. And I met a woman. They asked me to marry, and I said, where'd you meet? And they said, on JDate. And I said, how many? And she said, he was number 29. I said, well, you're a persistent woman. I got to tell you that
I think that
much.
should be the new slogan for JD.
What?
Have powerful kidneys, find you're married.
Well, I think JDate should be sponsored by Starbucks. I mean, I think this is a natural
Would like that.
commercial
I wanna ask you guys
corporate.
a question.
Yeah.
Do you find that people come to you and ask you to fix them up or to look for people for them because you have this broad swath of vision and meet all kinds of different people?
I get a different kind of encounter. Not that I'm going to fix them up, because they can identify me right away as I was the world's most incompetent single man. And so they really, but I get a person who comes with a sense of desperation.
Mm.
Sometimes it's men, but often it's women. And it's sad. I mean, she's reaching the end in her later 30s. She's an accomplished professional. From the surface, I mean, she's a, incredibly bright, attractive, interesting soul. And she says, I can't find a partner. I can't find a partner. I've dated and I've looked, been in relationships, but nothing sort of held, nothing stuck. And I'm getting older. I really do want a family. I can't find a partner. It's very difficult. And I think, you can listen to all kinds of psychological questions about, are men afraid of commitment? Are men still fighting with their mothers? And that's why they find, in heterosexual relations rather, that's why they find bonding with women so very difficult. Is it, are women looking for the wrong things in relationships? I mean, are men looking for the wrong things? Are they shopping in the wrong way? What I get, Sherre, isn't help me find a mate. What I get is I'm terrified I'm not going to find anybody.
Well, and also this new trend of women and men having children on their own without a spouse, which
Right.
is really beautiful because you're not reliant on someone else to fulfill your dream of becoming a parent. And I question, like, what does that do to redefine what is family in the future, which is already being redefined, but we might not need you guys in the future. I think there's a book coming out about that.
Well, there are books like that.
Yeah.
I found the opposite, by the way. It's kind of interesting, though. I have a couple of cases in my community where a woman came to me and said, I've decided to have a child on my own. And as soon as she had that child, then she met her match, her mate.
I have that so many.
And she said to me,
3 cases of that, Eddie.
right. And I maybe it's because she said, now I understand, because a guy who's willing to marry me with my kid and be my kid's, father, whatever you call it, stepfather, father, tells me something about his values. Or because her personality changed. Once she had the kid, she relaxed into the relationship and was so much more open to, who knows? But I've had several cases where that was the process.
I've had so many cases like that. It's very interesting. And I like that it could be either she was fundamentally changed by her personality, or it could be that she started attracting different types of men.
Yeah.
Or they were changed because there was a child already in place. Like, there's so many interesting notes about that. Marc, sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. One of the things I ask the couples that's been very informative to me on the deepest level is I'll ask them the simple, stupid question, what do you love about each other? And what I'm really looking for is the list of stuff. And I'm looking at the list on both sides and say, how many things do they mention that have nothing to do with physical beauty? And it turns out that overwhelmingly, the couples I marry really love most about the other person qualities that will not fade in time. Mm-hmm. Like, I love that he cares more for others than he cares for himself. I love that he's always willing to help people. I love the fact that, he makes me lunch, those kinds of qualities are really important. But, occasionally a guy will say, what do I love about her? Take a look at her. That's not that good. And occasionally I'll hear a guy say, what do I love about her? Well, she lets me have the remote. That's, to me, was the most outrageous, simple statement I've ever heard from couples. She lets me have the remote,
And
which means I get to control what's on TV, which means I want to marry someone who isn't going to change me and isn't going to have any demands on me, but who's going to serve me and let me be the boss. And so that's very, very revealing to me when I talk to the couples.
And I used to have a lot of judgment in the beginning for, like, did they touch each other? What did they say? And I realized, like, now that I make sure I meet the couple about 4 times before I marry them, or 3 times, because how they meet me the first day is very different when they settle into being comfortable with the rabbi. And I think it's very interesting because I used to look at how much they touch each other, Marc, like you said, and I noticed that it's very different the more that the witness is no longer a stranger to them or someone that they're trying to impress, because that really affects them. The other thing I'll say,
but it's different. They're not trying, when they touch each other, I'm not talking about they hug. No, I'm just talking about a little hand that
I have
goes
people
over.
that aren't touchers.
That doesn't change, in my experience. That doesn't change from the beginning to the end, because they aren't even aware that I'm looking at that. They
But
aren't even aware that
I have people that aren't touchers. The other thing I would add is, usually what you love so much about a person is also what you pretty much hate about them, right? They can be the most loyal person. Yes.
What?
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead, finish the thought.
I say this all the time. Usually a person that you so admire their loyalty to their family, like beyond belief, and it's something that you admire so much, can also frustrate the heck out of you because they're off to go take care of their family when you want them to be with your family, right? So often some of those traits become what we get most annoyed about. So I warn people about that. You may disagree, Marc, but I really believe it.
Yeah, I want them, because I don't think love is a zero-sum game. If they're helping their parents, they aren't helping you. I think it's that if they're a helping person, if they're a helpful person, a kind person, that kindness washes over everybody. That's my experience with it. But, I think there are some dark sides, and I think we should mention them. The darkest thing I've seen in marriage that scares me, actually, really profoundly terrifies me, is the phrase that I've now heard several couples use. They use it as a joke because they know it will offend me, but it's really the truth. They say, well, maybe this is a good beginner marriage. Like you talk about a beginner
the starter
home,
marriage comment?
starter marriage, beginner marriage. Yeah, that comment. I said, what? A what? And that's how some of them look at it. Look, we're a team, we're young, we're both pulling in some good money, and we'll see how it works. I also am not sure what the benefit of living together for many years is. At the beginning, I was, like everyone in the 60s, a big fan of, oh yeah, we'll live together and we'll see how it works. But I'm not sure now. I think there's a big difference about living together with no commitment and being married to someone. And now, as you know, the statistics are not very inspiring for people who are fans of monogamous marriage. They're not very inspiring. For years we've known about the divorce rate, but now we have a much more frightening statistic, and that is the number of people who don't intend to get married. People who are living together in what really looks like a marriage, but they're just not married, and they don't intend to get married. And some have children, some don't. You'd think, well, when they have children, then they'll want to get married. No, I think there's a big movement against marriage, just like there's a movement against circumcision, just like a lot of the things that we always assumed would be part of the value network of Jews who get married. It's not that way anymore. There's some dark stuff here.
I actually look at it, Marc, the opposite.
Yeah.
We started today talking about an episode from the Torah, from the patriarchal narratives of the Torah, which means you're talking 1800 BCE. And we talked about the marriage of Isaac to Rebekah. There are very few social institutions that came from 1500 BCE that are still around today. And it's remarkable. You remember there was, and it's remarkable that marriage exists altogether. And there was a time in the 1960s. Remember, there was a cover story, I think, on Look or Life magazine about, is marriage finished? Is marriage dead? Couples that were experimenting with open marriages, with multiple marriages. And I know there's a lot of that goes on, at least on the fringes of our society, of, open marriages or polyamorous relationships. But what's remarkable to me is that there still is, and what you're talking about in terms of couples who share a life together, but don't have a legal or legious bonding ceremony. But it's remarkable to me how marriage still remains normative, how people still want to grow up and get married and build homes together. And how monogamy, or I wouldn't call it monogamy, because now it occurs even with same-sex couples. I mean, that was one of the most interesting things about this last iteration of our social evolution, is that same-sex couples want marriage. There was a bill just passed by the Senate, with 67 votes in the Senate, to ensure the possibility that even same-sex couples can enjoy marriage, that there is this impulse within the human being, within human culture, it's beyond culture, within human beings, to find the partner and to share a life with a partner. And even in what you talk about, beginner marriages or serial monogamy or with a very high divorce rate, what's interesting of the high divorce rate is that there's even a higher remarriage rate. That is, after a person gets divorced, even though they've been deeply wounded, and that happens often, they still want to go out and start again. There still is this drive to find a partner to share my life with, to build a home with. And I think it's quite remarkable that this exists almost universally, not entirely, but almost universally around human cultures, and almost almost for the entirety of recorded human history.
Right.
Sure.
It still exists. That's not the point I was making, that it doesn't exist. Of course it exists, but I'm talking about the trends within it. And it's just, from my point of view, it's not that helpful to me to just look that something exists, but to see what are the trends. And is it going down, like the trend of the nuns, which you've spoken about, people who say, a record number of people who now say, I'm not religious, which never existed before. There always were non-religious people, but the trend is that that's going up. And we have to look at the trends, and we have to see, wait a minute, and there were a lot of critiques of marriage. Look, it was clear that one of the motivations for the feminist movement was the way traditional marriage oppressed women and limited their options in life.
Yeah.
So I think you're both right. I mean,
that was a very serious critique.
Right. But it didn't destroy marriage.
No, I'm not making that point.
Yeah.
There's still marriage, and there's still lots of people.
No, but of course it didn't. To me, is a wonder. That's
right.
all.
You're saying marriage redefined. The institution is solid, but it's redefined. I think you're both correct.
It's changed, it's reshaped, it's renegotiated.
Okay, this is such an unusual position for me to be in, where I'm like, you're both correct. I think what Marc is saying, because usually that's you, Eddie.
I know.
Yeah, we're all always correct. Let's just assume that.
So let's finish. I want to finish, and I want to give Sherre a chance to finish with a prayer. But before we finish the prayer, I want to ask you a really simple question. It's you're at a wedding, and you're about to you say, you do the ketubah and the bedekin, and you're about to go to the chuppah, and you have 30 seconds to say something to the couple. One tiny piece of rabbi advice, one tiny piece of wisdom, one tiny piece of a gift of inspiration as they begin their marital life together. What do you say to them? Sherre, what do you say to a couple?
I always say the same thing. Your only job under that chuppah is to love one another, which you do so beautifully. So just do that.
That's beautiful. Marc, what do you say to a couple?
Well, there's lots of different things I say to them. Sometimes I'll read Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, who said, love does not consist of gazing at each other, but in looking outward together in the same direction. Or sometimes Emily Bronte from Wuthering Heights, whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same. Or sometimes I'll quote them, Hafiz, the poet, the Muslim poet, your heart and my heart are very old friends. Or sometimes that's Scott Fitzgerald. You are the finest, loveliest, tenderest, and most beautiful person I have ever known. And even that is an understatement. And my favorite is Walt Whitman. We were together. I forget the rest.
That's beautiful.
I love that.
That's just beautiful. I tell them, this is a gift. It is the most profound and powerful and beautiful gift that life can give you. But it is a perishable gift and has to be protected. So begin each day and end each day with a word of gratitude to God and a word of gratitude to each other for this gift of love, and let it grow. Sherre, today I believe is your father's yahrzeit, and we remember with love. So would you finish us with a word and a prayer, please?
21 years today, according to the Hebrew calendar, that is my father's yahrzeit. And for those that are not aware, yahrzeit is the anniversary of the death of someone that you love. And it's customary to say the Kaddish, but it's also customary to study. And this morning, I just wanted to dedicate our learning and to all of you in my father's memory. He was a complicated man. I share that in my book, but we are all complicated. And what I have learned in remembering him is that as flawed as we are, we're also gifted with God's love and presence, and we each matter tremendously. So my prayer for each of us is that we have memory that gives us both the truth, the love, the compassion, and the empathy that allows us to find forgiveness, to find our own mortality, and to find peace.
Amen. Yeh Zachro Baruch. May his memory bring you many, many blessings, and may you embrace the
Amen.
blessings that are part of his life.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me this morning. Thank you for joining Rabbi Gellman and Rabbi Hirsch and me this morning to study. I hope that we filled you with inspiration and love. Go out and hug somebody you love. Following this, of course, Torah study from Valley Beth Shalom this morning. Torah study service from Valley Beth Shalom this morning. This coming week is Thanksgiving, so we will not have College of Jewish Studies this coming week. It's Erev Yontif, and I want you to go home and to make your turkey and gather your family and those you love and celebrate the gifts of life. But we will continue with Torah study, and we want to wish everybody a very happy Thanksgiving as well as a beautiful Shabbat Shalom. Thank you, colleagues. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.